Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. We're going to get started in just a minute. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for people that are coming on. Actually, and while we're waiting to have people come on, today's chamber chat is going to be about the county budget. We're going to be giving an overview, and so I thought it would be interesting to know if any of you on the call actually received funding from the county. So you'll see on your screen there is a poll. I just thought it would be of interest to know how many of the people on the call might be impacted by potential cuts to the budget, or we're going to be talking about a same services budget. So if you see that on your screen, go ahead and take the poll and we'll get started here soon. All right, very interesting. It looks like we have about 60% that don't, but then we have 40% of people on the call that do. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and we will get started. If Gigi, you want to kick us off?
I'd be happy to do that. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our chamber chat. This is Gigi Godwin, and I'm President and CEO of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. And on our webinar, we are joined today by the Chamber's fantastic county lobbyist, Ashlie Bagwell, from the firm Harris, Jones, and Malone. And of course, we have our very own Tricia Swanson, Vice President of Government Relations. Before we get into specifics, please know that we will email this information to you following today's webinar. Pivoting to today's webinar, we know that everyone is focused on coronavirus and how to navigate this unprecedented time. With this in mind, we thought it'd be helpful to give you an update on the status of the county budget, particularly with regard to the effects COVID-19 has had on current and future plans for our county. So Tricia, would you get us started, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Gigi. And Ashlie, are you on with us?
I am, Tricia.
All right, fantastic. So the chamber thought it would be helpful, given what the condition or the global pandemic we're in, to give an overview of the status of the budget. The chamber's long advocated for different pieces of and today is just focused on the operating budget. The chamber has long advocated for different components and pieces of the operating budget, and sometimes against certain tax increases in the budget. And so we thought it would be helpful today to give you an overview of what was proposed by the county executive, what's entailed in his recommended budget, potential budget changes that might be coming due to coronavirus, updated revenue projection scenarios, and the different options that the council has. All of this information we got from the county council. They have had 3 or 4 conversations at this point about what their plan is for the budget. So all of this information is from them, and we will, like Gigi said, share it out afterwards. Ashlie, did you want to talk a little bit about, we're going to be using the term same services budget, and I know the council has talked about that. Did you want to give us an overview of what that means and the term that they're asking us to use instead?
Sure. Thank you, Tricia. Thanks, Gigi. So I think, as everyone is aware, the county executive proposed or kind of introduced his budget, and now the budget is in the hands of the county council. And while all of that was happening, this pandemic became a global public health crisis. And so, not to steal any of Tricia's thunder as she is about to go through the budget, but, fairly immediately, Councilmember Nancy Navarro, who is chair of the Government Operations Committee, introduced a resolution that I think kind of framed how the council is going to approach the fiscal year 21 budget. And how it was, I think, originally phrased is that their starting place, if you will, would be a same services budget looking at the current fiscal year 20, as a starting place. I think they've changed a little bit how they're talking about that, and now calling it a continuity of services budget, simply because same services budget, just because of the time that's elapsed during this current fiscal year, could actually mean for the next fiscal year a decrease in services, for a variety of reasons. And so I think what they're trying to convey as their starting place is a continuity of services from this last fiscal year, with any enhancements being only those enhancements that are required by either law or policy, and that there would be no new staff and no new programs.
Awesome, thank you. And that's going to be important to know as we kind of walk through the proposed budget. So I thought it'd be good for you to go over that piece of it. Before we go into this budget, for those of you that don't necessarily know the county budget process, I thought it would be helpful for us just to quickly go over that. The county executive is required to officially submit his budget to the council by a certain date in March. This year he submitted it on March 16th, which, of those of you that have been counting how long we've been kind of in a shelter in place and quarantine, that was the first day of that. So he released the budget on that first Monday, and that's what we'll be going over. And it's important to note also, in Montgomery County, the council has extraordinary power as it relates to the budget. For those of you that follow the state budget, you know that the governor submits it to the senators and delegates, and they can only remove funding or move funding around. They can't add to it. The council in Montgomery County has extraordinary power in that they can completely redo the budget if they want to. So it's just important to keep that in mind as we talk about potential council actions moving forward. And Ashlie touched on Councilmember Navarro's resolution, and I just put that up here on the screen so you can see it. And then again, we'll be sending this out. Ashlie, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next?
I don't.
Okay. So here's what the county executive recommended in his budget. You can see that there's some increases in Montgomery County government, in Montgomery County public schools. Montgomery College saw a slight uptick, and then Park and Planning got some additional funding as well. And you can see on here, and I'm sure many of the people on the call, when he did release his budget, there was an assumed property tax increase in that. We are told, and I've been told by council members, that there is zero appetite for any increase in taxes of any form in this budget, but it is worth noting that the budget as recommended by the county executive does include a property tax increase. And then it's also, to Ashley's point earlier, talking about no new staff, you can see on here the potential changes in staff and additional pins that were recommended. Our chamber, when we had met with county, or then candidate county executive, Mark Elridge, he had mentioned that he didn't want to add more staff to county government. He wanted to actually condense it and streamline it and make it more efficient. And so I thought it was interesting to include this slide. As you can see, his recommended budget does have over 700 new positions, and a big chunk of those are in MCPS, but there are 147 pins that he recommended to add to the county government. So I just thought that was of interest to some of you on the call. Ashlie, did you have anything else to add, or did you want to talk a little bit about the collective bargaining piece?
Yeah, I was going to make two additional points, Tricia, just in terms of the budget that has been submitted by the county executive. As Tricia notes here on this slide, and I think as Council President Katz stated earlier this week during a council session, the different labor unions have, it sounds like, come to the county executive and to the council through Council President Katz and have initiated conversations about how, in light of this public health crisis, it makes sense to move forward with regard to their agreements. And so it does sound like discussions have at least started or will start soon about that. The other item, Tricia, that I was gonna mention as well that I thought was just kind of interesting with regard to the budget as it was submitted is kind of a cut in the budget in the amount of $10 million that really didn't have any details beyond the fact that it was a $10 million cut. And I think the idea was we'll find $10 million worth of efficiencies as we move forward in the fiscal year. But as the budget was presented, there were no specifics as to what those cuts would be. And I think I mentioned that only because it got a lot of playtime during the discussion amongst council members. And I think as it was presented by council staff, kind of a cut like that was deemed to be not legal. I don't think you can make a cut without saying where the cut's going to happen. And so
and there's a great article in 7 State about that I'll be sure to circulate with the people on the call that gave a great overview of what you just referenced. And that's an important, definitely important piece to note. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. You know, it's just in terms of the budget, it's $10 million, but $10 million of unspecified cuts. So I think that will, you know, that's something that we will be watching to see how it unfolds as well.
Absolutely, and people should feel free to ask questions throughout. I don't know if we said that in the beginning or not, but as we go through these numbers, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the question box. So budget changes that we do know of so far, based on what the county council has been working on over the last month or so, there's an additional 38.5 million, all of it for emergency funding for coronavirus. I know some of the members on the call have accessed or have applied for the public health emergency grant, and that's a piece of that. What I did think was an interesting conversation that the council had last week, and Councilmember Friedson asked this, is as they're looking forward to planning for the fiscal year 21 upcoming budget, what kind of impacts the current fiscal year 20 budget might be seeing. And unfortunately, the county executive office at that time last week weren't able to kind of answer that. But I do think that that's something that is of interest to county residents and something the chamber will be following closely, because it's hard to even do a same service or continuity budget if you don't know what we're ending our fiscal year 20 budget looking like. And that's an issue across multiple jurisdictions in multiple states. There's been a couple of pay differentials that we have on here, and then the federal and state funding are giving back to the county, so that kind of adds into the fiscal year 20 bottom line, but that is something that our chamber is closely following. Ashlie, did you have any additions to this one?
No.
Okay. So this is what I found the most interesting in the council discussions. As they're planning moving forward, they needed to figure out what kind of a deficit or a deficit they would be looking at for this budget and future budgets. And so you can see 3 different scenarios on your screen. There's the first one is a short recession with a quick recovery. Even in that situation, you're looking, and these are in the millions, you're looking at $150 to $250 million shortfall. With a short recession and a long recovery, you're at $260 to $500 million that they'll need to make up. And then in a deep recession with a long recovery, you're looking at $360 million to $600 million. And that's with the combination of our current budget and projected budget moving forward.
And Tricia, the only thing I'll add to that, as they were considering these 3 scenarios, and I think it's important to consider, all three, I think it was discussed that scenario number one is probably unrealistic.
Right, right.
So we're looking at either scenario 2 or scenario 3.
Right. So in the range of, $260 to $600 million that they'll have to find
Correct.
funding for through cuts and things like that. And then these were the different factors that were impacting the revenue changes that the council discussed that I thought would be of interest. Potential reductions in wage and salary income, reductions in capital gains income, property taxes, property sales are all leading to that kind of shortfall in the budget. And then what we still don't know is any potential funding from the federal government or, how we might be impacted by unemployment or furloughed workers. We don't know what the recovery time is going to look like. And actually what I think is interesting to maybe discuss for a little bit, we've been talking to some of our members, and I know, Ashlie, you and I have talked about this, where even when restrictions are potentially lifted for retail, restaurants, other things, whether people will actually want to go into public. And it's not suddenly going to be hundreds of people feeling safe to go back to restaurants and things. And so even with those restrictions lifted, there's still going to be a long recovery before people feel safe and comfortable going out like they did before. Ashlie, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the only thing I'll add to that, Tricia, just to build on what you've just said and some of the discussions that we've been having, and just to get folks thinking, is, are there policy changes or regulatory changes, given kind of the new world that we're going to be living in, that might make sense as we look at repositioning businesses and industries, as we move towards kind of reopening things. And so, maybe this is a conversation for another call, but I do think it makes sense to get people to start thinking about that, as both the governor and the county's administration has changed regs to allow businesses, or some businesses, to participate in kind of a shelter-in-place world. Does it make sense to keep some of those new, more flexible regulations and policies in place once we start reopening? So it's something for folks to start thinking about.
I do absolutely, it's funny you said a future conversation. I do think that would be an interesting, whether we do a Teams call or something where we can engage different industries and get the best of their thinking as to how they've pivoted thus far over the last, I guess we're at 6 weeks now, and what that might mean moving forward, and how the chamber can be of assistance as they're thinking about making those changes, and as they're looking at a long kind of bounce back, what policies and other supports that we could get at various levels of government. I do think that's an interesting. And actually we have Susan Madden from Montgomery College on here. I'm actually going to unmute her. She has a point about changes that Montgomery College is making that I think our participants might find of interest. So Susan, I'm going to unmute you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Do you want to share what you put in the chat? I actually think that's a really interesting point.
So I put that in there because I've seen news reports along these lines as well. There are other jurisdictions, restaurants are thinking about how they would operate and make their customers feel safe. So with or without social distancing requirements, even after the stay-at-home order is lifted, I think we all have to think about how we operate in a different way. And so right now, the college is hoping and praying we can be open for classes, face-to-face classes in the fall. And assuming we are, how do we reorganize our facilities to facilitate social distancing? So will a class that normally runs with 20 people, will we have to have 10 in there so that we can do appropriate social distancing within the classroom, right? And so I think a lot of organizations like grocery stores, restaurants, other kinds of retailers are going to have to think about that, not only insofar as there may be a public health directive to do that, but also to convince people to come back.
Correct.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, this is a global pandemic that is impacting every single industry, every single sector, and will for into the future. I don't know if we'll ever go back to the way things have been before, and things that people aren't necessarily thinking of now. A lot of different industries and sectors are changing already and thinking through things. So I just thought that would be of interest to the people on our webinar, because that was not something that I had thought about with making class sizes smaller. I think that's really interesting. So thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Okay, and then if there's anyone else on here that wants to kind of share how their industry is pivoting and shifting, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat box, but we can definitely have a conversation about it. And I'll plan a future webinar or Teams call with different industries so we can have that conversation to hear from all of you. So now that we know where, or we don't know quite where, but where revenue projections might be, the council has a few different options. Ashlie talked about the same services budget. So they can either do that with the continuity of services, and then that's under here, to submit revisions to the budget early in next fiscal year when there's more information about required reductions, and then they'll be directing agencies and departments to minimize expenses. And then option B is they can kind of create their own budget. Ashlie, did you want to add to that and then talk about what the council is probably, or not probably, but is talking about doing?
In terms of
kind of the continuity of budget.
Sure. So we talked about kind of the same services or continuity of services and using that as a baseline. I think there was some decision, again, as Tricia said, there, was not a lot of information, I think, thus far as to whether or not or when we will see a savings plan come from the administration. And so I think, that remains to be seen. I think too, there was some discussion about how and when to make cuts for the budget. Do they do some now with the understanding that maybe there will be a savings plan down the road, or do they wait and try and do everything at one time? And I don't think they've made any decisions about that. I think they're going to be tracking COVID-19 related expenditures closely. I think what, just in terms of parameters that the council has set forth in terms of how they would like to move forward, they want to do everything they can to maintain 10% reserves. There was some discussion that, is it possible now to look at obviously there will be some things that will just pop up in terms of cuts that need to be made or have to be made. But, are there things that in looking at the budget now, you can already tell based on either the shelter in place order or things that we know that aren't happening right now, that they can go ahead and cut, knowing that that there's already going to be a reduction in services or expenses in certain places in the budget? Are there just common sense places where they can go ahead and make reductions? And so I think they're going ahead and looking at opportunities there. And then I think the other thing that they said, that they want to do everything they can to try and avoid doing is any kind of workforce reductions. And so I think those are the parameters that the council is looking at as they move forward with building this budget.
Absolutely, thank you. So that's the general overview that we had prepared for today. Unfortunately, a lot of it is still unknown, but the chamber, with Ashley's assistant, is continually following this and will continue to follow it. I don't know if there are any pending questions that are still out there, or if Gigi, you wanted to chime in with your thoughts. But I've given you access, Gigi.
Right, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say, Ashlie, thank you. That was a terrific overview, and you and Tricia have been tag teaming and getting a sense of what our members and our community needs and communicating that in a very effective way with our county council members. So, you know, on behalf of everybody at the chamber, I know that the board has been very, very encouraged by your fantastic work there. So, you know, as the expression goes, never waste a good crisis. You know, we've got an opportunity to work with council members and a county executive that are finding their way through an unprecedented situation. And they are relying on us as a trusted source of information, guidance, viewpoints, you know, subject matter expertise. And the members that we have on this call, and I want to say thank you, Susan Madden. I've had the pleasure of working with you for many years, including as a former trustee of the college, but also in my capacity at the chamber. But we need to get the best of your thinking, those of you who are on this call, because we find that the county executive and the county council are incredibly open to new ideas, and as we all are, as we're trying to navigate, because we will come out on the other side of this, and we have to be poised and ready for a probably different looking economy, but we're going to help shape that, as we do with all things we do in advocacy. So we have to be in the game and continue to be proactive, but we rely on all of you for the best of your thinking. There is no complaint, observation, grievance that is too small. We'd rather hear it and see if we can find a solution. Would you agree, Ashlie and Tricia?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, and that kind of pivots to the last slide that we have. As you are running into questions, or if you have, and I also will send out Ashley's contact information in our follow-up email, because she is a wealth of information and knowledge, and has been a fantastic lobbyist for our chamber in a multitude of different ways. But we do have our contact information on the screen. We're going to be following up this webinar with a survey, and if you want to put in, if you have different questions or thoughts about how we can kind of transition in advocacy in a virtual world, these chamber chats have been great to do, and we've gotten great feedback, but I am completely open if you have different suggestions or ideas. We're talking about potentially having some Zoom or Teams chats with some of our county council members to hear about their budget priorities. So please fill out the survey, and if you have ideas for, or if you have questions about future chamber chats or different topics that you would like for us to explore a little bit more, we would love to hear from all of you. I don't see any other questions. Gigi, did you, or Ashlie, did you have any closing remarks, and then we'll give it to Gigi?
I don't think so, Tricia. I mean, I agree with you that, and with what Gigi said, that if folks have ideas, issues, questions, both with, you know, what is going on now, or, you know, how things are going to be in a couple of months, I think we look forward to working with people either to get answers or to find solutions.
Yes, I would say that's true. And Ashlie, can you just remind us one more time before we go to closing here, what the schedule is, the sort of the what's next at the county council, you know, what is the calendar looking like, and what's the schedule for getting all our thoughts to them?
That's a good question, Gigi. They, you know, it's because of where we are right now, it's just a different process, and I think everybody's kind of feeling their way. Obviously, where the council used to have different committee meetings and work sessions, they're not able to do that now, and so they're just kind of taking issues up both at their Tuesday and Thursday council sessions. And so to the extent that folks have questions or issues with the fiscal year, the budget that they're discussing now, I encourage you to reach out to Tricia sooner rather than later, just because the process is a little different, and I feel like moving pretty quickly. They'll look to kind of wrap that work up, I would say, between mid and late May.
And that reminds me, for those of you that did answer yes, that you do receive funding from the county, make sure we know that. And so as we're having discussions with council members, we want to make sure that the funding that you get remains protected. That's obviously our first priority, is our members, getting the resources that they need, specifically in times like this. So if you answered yes to that poll question, do make sure that our chamber knows that what funding you access. Oh, there is one question before we close out about, Ashlie, could you talk about the projections? So in prior years, in a normal budget cycle, they make projections based on property taxes and income taxes about what the council can potentially be spending, and those have been off, to put it lightly, in prior years. Are they having conversations about how to make that process better or more accurate? I think now more than ever, that's incredibly needed, especially if we're looking at cutting, half or $500 million ballpark.
No, I think that's a good question, Tricia. And I think that, as you said, for the last 2 years has been a complaint that there's got to be some better way to forecast revenue, so we don't end up in a situation where we're several hundreds of millions of dollars off from what the projections were. And so, I've not heard any updates about, a different way to do that forecast, but I do think that even before this pandemic, that was an issue that folks were pushing them to figure out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was kind of a jaw dropper, because that just further it made the situation even more difficult, that they had a deficit they weren't even aware of. So yeah, this is a tricky bit of business here that we have, but it's also an opportunity. And I also have to say that as we discussed with our executive committee on Monday morning of this week, the executive committee of the board, we have found that our elected officials, our work at the federal, state, and at the county level, and this is about the county budget this morning, but they're reaching out to us and working with us on your behalf, even more than I've ever seen before. So this is the time. Again, I just can't stress how important it is for us to hear your thoughts, your recommendations. It will make a big difference. Every viewpoint matters. And so when we hear it, it's a good day for us.
Fantastic. Well, did you have any closing remarks, Gigi? Oh, and just before I let you go, for those of you that haven't applied yet for the small business public health emergency grant at the council, they announced yesterday that they are closing the application tomorrow, the 25th at 5 p.m. So if you haven't yet submitted it, make sure you do that by tomorrow. It's incredibly important, even if you're not in the first round of funding. When we had Jerome from the county executive's office speak on last week's webinar, he did note that if and hopefully when more funding is put into that fund, that they'll go through the applicants that have applied. And so they're closing that tomorrow at 5. So make sure if you haven't applied that you do submit your application. And with that, Gigi, I will turn it over to you and we will close out.
And just to pivot on Tricia's announcement there, I'm so glad you included that. And we did send that information out and we'll continue to do so. We don't want you to miss that opportunity in the next 24 hours. But get ready, because for those of you who are listening or who have clients or customers or tenants that are listening to this discussion or need to be informed by it, we hear, thank you, Marco Rubio, for tweeting this out a few moments ago, but we're understanding that the SBA portal will reopen on Monday for the federal funding. So, you know, that's a huge issue for people as well. So we encourage people to continue to apply through their lenders, through their banks, to do that. So you know, we've got a lot happening at the same time. We stand ready to help you with that. So please join me in thanking Ashlie for an amazing presentation. Applause all the way around to you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Susan Madden, for contributing to our discussion today. It's always appreciated. And thanks, Tricia, for getting us all sorted out today. And Alexis Reed, who's actually driving as all of us are speaking, who you know, organizes us and manages all this, and is our Director of Marketing and Communications. Thank you, Alexis, for what you're doing to move us forward today. So this was a great discussion. And again, you will get all this information emailed to you today, and it'll have as always, the Chamber's contact information. And remember, we're here to help you. That's our mission. And so please, you know, looking ahead, we're here to help you, and we look forward to navigating this craziness together. Thank you.